There's a moment most people remember very clearly, even if they don't talk about it. It's the first time you check your bank account and don't feel a knot in your stomach. You're not rich, you're not bragging, you're not buying champagne or booking a first-class flight. You just aren't scared anymore. The number isn't red. You're not counting days until payday. You're not mentally rehearsing which bill you can delay if something goes wrong. Usually somewhere around $20,000. That number might sound random or underwhelming, or even small compared to what social media tells you real wealth looks like. But $20,000 isn't important because it makes you impressive. It's important because it changes how you think, how you decide, and how you move through the world. Most financial advice skips over this stage entirely. It jumps straight to investing strategies, retirement projections, and seven-figure net worths. But before any of that matters, there's a psychological threshold you have to cross first. And if you never cross it, none of the advanced stuff really sticks. Today, I want to talk about why the first $20,000 is the most important money milestone most people will ever hit. Not because it makes you wealthy, but because it moves you out of survival mode and into strategy mode. And once that happens, everything else gets easier. If you're starting from close to zero, building savings feels brutal. You do all the right things. You budget, you cut back, you save consistently. A car repair, a medical bill, a rent increase. Suddenly you're back where you started, wondering why you even tried. That's not because you're bad with money. It's because when you don't have a buffer, every dollar is already spoken for. Your money doesn't belong to you yet. It belongs to rent, food, utilities, debt payments, and emergencies that haven't happened, but feel inevitable. When that's your reality, your brain stays in a constant low-grade stress response. Psychologists call this scarcity mindset, but that phrase almost undersells how powerful it is. When money is tight, your mind becomes reactive. You focus on what's urgent, not what's important. You make decisions to avoid pain today, even if they create more pain tomorrow. That's why people take jobs they hate, why they stay in bad situations, why they panic spend the moment they get a little relief. It's not lack of discipline, it's survival behavior. And survival behavior is very hard to outthink. There's a point where this starts to change. Not because life suddenly becomes easy, but because it becomes manageable. That point is when you have enough saved that a problem doesn't immediately turn into a crisis. For most people, that's about 3 to 6 months of living expenses, enough to cover rent, enough to cover food, enough to handle normal life without panic. Depending on where you live and how you live, that number often lands around $20,000. What's important isn't the exact dollar amount. What's important is what it represents: time and flexibility. When you have that buffer, your money stops feeling like it's constantly on fire, and that changes how your brain works. Up until this point, you're asking one question over and over again: how do I get through this? After this point, the question becomes, how do I make this better? That shift is everything. Instead of reacting to every expense, you start planning ahead. Instead of fearing the next problem, you start looking for opportunities. Instead of trying not to lose, you start thinking about how to win. This isn't motivational talk, it's cognitive science. When immediate survival is no longer on the line, your brain can finally allocate mental energy to long-term thinking. You gain clarity, patience, and perspective. You stop making decisions purely based on fear. And once fear stops running the show, money becomes a tool instead of a threat. Here's something people don't talk about enough. The first $20,000 is usually the hardest money you'll ever save. Not because it's the largest amount, but because you're doing all the work yourself. At the beginning, there's no momentum. Your savings aren't generating meaningful returns. Every dollar comes from discipline, restraint, and consistency. You're pushing the financial equivalent of a heavy object uphill. And that's why so many people quit early. Not because they're incapable, but because the feedback loop is slow. The effort doesn't immediately feel worth it. But once you reach a critical mass, the dynamics change. Your money starts contributing alongside you. The progress isn't dramatic at first, but it's noticeable. And psychologically, that matters a lot. Because now, saving doesn't feel like sacrifice, it feels like progress. Let's keep this simple. A percentage return on a small amount feels insignificant. A percentage return on a larger amount feels meaningful. The rate doesn't change, the strategy doesn't change, the risk doesn't change, the scale does. At low balances, investment growth feels like background noise. At higher balances, it starts showing up in ways you can actually feel. And that's when compounding stops being an abstract concept and starts feeling real. Not magical, not instant, just steady. You don't wake up rich, but you wake up knowing you're moving forward even when you're not actively trying. That's a powerful feeling. Saving $20,000 does something most people don't expect. It changes who you think you are. To reach that point, you had to prove something to yourself. You had to show consistency. You had to make boring choices over and over again. You had to delay gratification when it wasn't fun. And once you've done that, you can't unknow it. You stop seeing yourself as someone who's bad with money or just not good at saving. You become someone who knows they can handle discomfort now for a better future later. That identity shift matters more than the money itself. Because habits scale, mindset scale, discipline scales. Once you know you can do hard things financially, bigger goals stop feeling unrealistic. Here's a strange thing that happens once you have a financial foundation. You care less about tiny expenses and more about big decisions. When money is tight, every purchase feels loaded. Coffee feels guilty. Groceries feel stressful. Minor spending decisions consume mental energy because every dollar feels dangerous. But once you're stable, you realize those micro decisions barely move the needle. What actually matters are the big levers: where you live, what you drive, how much you save, how you grow your income. Those decisions affect your life by tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars over time. So instead of obsessing over $3 choices, you focus on $30,000 decisions. And that mental shift is incredibly freeing. Money doesn't just affect what you buy, it affects what you tolerate. When you're living paycheck to paycheck, your job owns you. You can't afford to rock the boat. You can't afford to say no. You can't afford to wait for something better. That puts you in a weak position, even if you're good at what you do. But once you have a real buffer, the dynamic changes. You don't need to quit your job to feel the difference. Just knowing you could survive without it changes how you show up. Confidence tends to attract opportunity. Not because of luck, but because you're no longer operating from fear. This is what people mean when they say money buys freedom. Not yachts, not watches, not status. Options. The option to leave a bad situation. The option to take a chance. The option to say no. When you're broke, everything feels urgent. When you're stable, you get to be selective, and selectivity compounds. This is where many people sabotage themselves. They finally hit $20,000 and immediately spend it. A new car, a lifestyle upgrade, a purchase that feels deserved. And then emotionally, that makes sense. You worked hard. You were disciplined. You want a reward. But here's the hard truth. That $20,000 isn't the reward, it's the engine. It's the thing that makes every future goal easier. Once it's gone, you're back to pushing uphill again. The reward isn't spending it, the reward is what it unlocks. Nothing illustrates this better than cars. Most people spend an absurd amount of money on transportation over their lifetime. Payments, insurance, maintenance, depreciation. And the worst part? Cars don't just cost money, they destroy it. The moment you drive a new car off the lot, its value drops. You're paying for something that's actively shrinking. Meanwhile, the same money invested over time could grow into something life-changing. A car payment might make you feel successful today, but it might be costing you years of freedom tomorrow. Once you've crossed the $20,000 threshold, that opportunity cost becomes impossible to ignore. The goal isn't to become cheap or joyless. The goal is to be intentional. When you understand how money compounds and how time multiplies decisions, you start asking better questions. Not, can I afford this monthly payment, but what am I giving up if I choose this? That question alone changes everything. You start realizing that many of the things you thought you wanted don't actually matter that much. And the things that do matter, freedom, security, flexibility, are surprisingly affordable if you're patient. $20,000 won't make you rich, but it will move you out of survival mode. It will give you mental clarity. It will give you leverage. It will give you options. It's the difference between reacting to life and shaping it. If you're below that number, don't get discouraged. Everyone who's financially stable today once stood exactly where you are now. And if you're above it, protect it, grow it, respect it. Because that first foundation is the hardest one you'll ever build. And once it's in place, everything else finally has something solid to stand on.